Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Labor Relations Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Before we begin, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Looks like none. So next, I would like to call on our mayor for any opening remarks. Your worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunter, Chair of Finance. So good afternoon to members of council, city staff, representatives of outside boards, committees, members of the public. As we begin deliberations on the 2023 budget, the important work we are about to embark on requires thoughtful debate as we, as councillors, make strategic decisions. The budget reflects what we value and how we embrace and support our strategic priorities. Our budget deliberations will require collaboration between council and staff, while being mindful of the needed financial commitment to the support of the city's infrastructure and the services used by residents. During the inaugural address, I talked about being ambitious in our work and to build on the past and to face the future with courage and optimism. There are many pressures facing our city, maintaining and replacing aging infrastructure, and how to fund this necessary work and the city's debt levels. Inflation is very much on our minds and will bring its own challenges as we discuss service levels and the possibility of adding new services. These decisions will have short-term and long-term implications for the city. The city received the most feedback for the draft 2023 budget compared to previous years. And I know that staff are looking at expanding the opportunities for public engagement. I want to thank the public who took the time to participate in the budget survey and to provide their thoughtful input. The results will be formally presented this afternoon, and I look forward to discussing the results with council. Thank you to our Director of Corporate Service, Ms. Kruger, and all the directors and their staff for their work leading up to the start of the city's budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have nothing further to add beyond welcoming everyone, and I look forward to some good discussion. Next, I'd like to call on our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank the corporate leadership team, managers, and all staff involved in conducting the research and analysis that again went into this year's budget preparations. There are challenges, risks, and opportunities facing the city of Stratford, and we must think strategically to make informed decisions for both the short-term and long-term sustainability of this city. Upper levels of government continue to mandate program changes, service level standards, and new initiatives for municipalities without confirming long-term sustainable financial supports. Stratford's assessment base is growing. However, replacement of our aging existing infrastructure and building up reserves to fund future projects will need to be carefully managed. In addition, climate change initiatives and embedding these in our programs and services will require strategic decision-making of council. The city continues to experience staff recruitment and retention challenges and an increasing workload on staff and resources. As council deliberates on the draft 2023 budget, I ask that you consider the short-term and long-term implications of the matters presented and any new initiatives raised by council. As part of these budget deliberations, council will be asked to make decisions to invest in municipal services and programs, new initiatives, and expansion requests. Corporate leadership team has carefully considered what is included in the budget and the impact on expenditures and future expenditures, debt levels, and funding sources in order to continue to provide these important services to residents and the public. As you've heard, there are dual pressures on our aging infrastructure replacement as well as inflation, and these have had additional strain to consider. However, I believe that we have a good strategy to meet our requirements for our asset management plan, and I am very proud of the work of staff. A special thank you also to Carmen Kruger and Wendy Partridge for your work and dedication to compile the budget binder. This is a great resource for council and the public to refer to during the budget and afterwards. Thank you to council for your time that you have put into going through the budget binder over these past few weeks as you prepare for these budget deliberations. On behalf of corporate leadership team, we look forward to working with council as you discuss the 2023 draft budget and make important decisions to set the direction for the city for 2023 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. The next item on our agenda is a review of the budget survey results. Can I have a motion to accept that report? Councillor McCabe, seconded by Mayor Ritzma. All in favor? Looks like that's carried. So I'll turn it over now to our Director of Corporate Services, Ms. Kruger.
Thank you, through the chair. I think the report really does speak to itself. I'm like the mayor alluded to, I'm quite thrilled with the response levels that we got from this particular survey. I think we can continue to build on the format that we used, as well as start introducing maybe some more specific and explicit types of questions in these surveys. So I'm pretty thrilled about that. The report itself is speaks a little bit to the overall outcomes of the survey, and there are some themes that emerged as part of the budget for in the feedback, but many of the comments that were provided by residents, some of them have context, some of them are very specific to a certain concern. So this report is really just to provide council with the overall results of that survey, and we can kind of build upon the some of the comments that were provided and the questions that were raised in responding in future communications with residents. So I'm happy to take any questions that any of council members may have about the survey.
Councillor Henderson.
Yes, it was very nice to see that more people took part. So most, a lot of them seem to have an easier access to be able to do it this time. Some of the comments, I'm wondering, is there plans to maybe do like frequently asked questions or something, so that, like, I found myself as I was reading and saying, oh, this is why, or this is what, or here's what's going on, or to maybe have a place that people could go and those comments could be addressed, even if it's I'm guessing you would have the emails for the ones that sent the surveys in, even if a simple explanation goes out to the person, so they realize that we heard what they said and this is the approximate answer for that. I was going to go through and highlight one that I had highlighted a couple that I thought would be not just of interest to the people that filled the survey out that way, but to others in our city, because you can see the same sort of questions over and over, or answers to the surveys over and over. But there was a couple that I thought, just an idea. What are your thoughts on that?
Through the chair, I think it's a great suggestion. We, with the survey responses we received for 2022's draft budget, we did do a similar type of a document where we tried to extract out where there were particular questions or particular themes and try to address that. With this survey format, we got actually a little bit more useful feedback in terms of how, like, people framing questions in a proper format, as opposed to just a one-word responses or one-line responses. So I think that gives us a good way to be able to address some of the questions. I think it's also another opportunity for us to provide some education and some real, I'll say, operational support for some of the things that we do. There seems to be, in some responses, not all, but in some, there's not necessarily a clear understanding of how the service or how the thing actually works. So we can certainly provide some more background and do that. I think that it's something that would probably be like subsequent to the budget process itself. So it's not going to necessarily be overly helpful to residents during the budget process, just given the amount of time that it takes to compile. But certainly it might be something we could utilize for the 2024 budget as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks.
Any more questions? Pardon, Councillor Burbach, please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, it's just further to what Councillor Henderson was saying. There definitely were themes in people's responses. So one of them that, well, everyone will become more familiar with is there's a lot of discussion about the roads and comments about potholes and the condition of the roads and so on. And I'm wondering, not maybe as an individual response to each, but I wonder if there's a way that we could communicate to the public, and maybe this is a question more for the Director of Infrastructure, just maybe we can have a page on our website that says, okay, this is our, I know we do list some of the maintenance plans out the next 10 years, but maybe a little bit more of this is how we approach making these decisions in a general way, so we could point people to the page and say, okay, this is the type of, you know, these are our road conditions now, these are the percentages, and just some way of giving a little bit more feedback to people so they can understand perhaps how complex it actually is. I don't know if that's a possibility, but maybe it's something, again, after the budget process, being able to point people to a specific page of information would be very handy, I think.
Thank you. Anything further? No, I did have one question, Ms. Kruger. If there's a way to do a tally of the number of times specific items were mentioned. So for example, roads, I assume most of those were not positive, but some other items were mentioned frequently. And I wonder if we could have a tally of the number pro, con, just so we had some idea of how important those things are.
For sure, through the chair, absolutely. That's something we can add to the survey responses. I think most of the places where people had the ability to comment and provide some additional feedback, they also were responding to a yes or a no, or a I value this or I don't type of a question. So I think if, like, in terms of some of those questions, the responses are available in terms of a tally in the pie chart or in the whatever. But certainly, like I said, I did see some themes emerge as well. So I think we can certainly try to, provide some more information for that.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Henderson.
Yes, we did see roads have come up quite a bit. Like, I know there was concerns about John Street, but when I looked into the capital budget, I saw John Street was being done this year. So I mean, I don't know if everybody's aware that, you can go on the budget page and you can see the next 10 years of what streets and repairs and different things that are going to go on, so that people have an idea when their road's going to be done, or, those are important things, especially if you're planning a wedding or different things, if your road's going to be under. I mean, we usually have a general idea, and I think, yeah, I think another common theme was a lot of people wanted to know just what the programs were and the services we offer. So that was mentioned quite a few times. And transit is another example of, like, people see the buses and they think they're empty all the time, and yet I think it's around over 600,000 people ride the buses. And I think the last report we saw, there was over 8,000 passes purchased last year. And so people are getting on and off at different times, so those kind of things will help. And I realize that, I think it's around 200,000 of that's youth, but that's still a lot of people using our transit.
Any further questions or comments? No. All right, we'll move on. Our next item is 6.2, the treasurer's update. If I can turn that to Ms. Kruger again.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm going to just share my screen here, so hopefully I do this without issue. Last time I did this, it pooched me right out of the system, so bear with me for a second. Let's see here. This works. Can everybody see my screen with the starting slide? Somebody?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Just make sure I'm ready to go. So, all right. So I just have a few sort of slides to go through to give everyone a bit of an update, a bit of a summary. And, you know, we talked a little bit about this at the orientation session, but just to kind of keep the context and the framework in play for tonight's meeting, as well as the next few budget meetings. So really, our objectives at this point are to begin reviewing the overall draft budget for all the divisions and the local boards, and doing that as a coordinated process. So not just individually looking at divisions on their own as a standalone. And we're also including those that are fully supported by user fees. So we're including those divisions that don't have a levy impact, but are part of the corporation's overall services. We're going to recap some of the highlights from the draft budget package. Again, I'll try and keep it very high level. Due to the size and the complexity of the capital program, we're going to start with that to walk through some of the projects that we've got identified, and look at the funding that comes from existing reserve funds and current year transfers to reserve funds. We also want to see some questions asked to understand what's being asked in 2023. And ask council to make a note of specific items that you want to revisit or explore further if we don't dig into it enough in tonight's meeting. And for any changes that are going to arise as a result of this draft budget, we are looking for council to make motions to ensure that everything gets captured and that that comes back to staff so that we can track it. So out of the total capital plan, we're looking in 2023 with 105 proposed capital projects. These range in size from, you know, several $1,000s up to several $1 million. So they're all different sizes and shapes and types. Compared to the previous budget, we had 109 projects last year set aside, totaling about 40 million. Some of these you will notice, some of the returning councillors or members of the public may notice that some of the projects in the 2023 capital program are brought forward from the prior year. So we're bringing them forward because in addition to the capital program and the operating budget being a financial exercise, it's also our work plan, a staff's work plan to get some of this work done. So we don't want to lose sight of some of the things that may have been approved last year, but aren't yet completed or started. So that's kind of why that will happen. It doesn't, the program doesn't really impact, it does not impact the levy if it was previously approved, because those fundings were addressed in the prior year. So the primary focus of the city's capital program is the replacement and rehabilitation of existing assets that are used to deliver our city services. So it's not, the focus is not really to sort of explore new initiatives. It sometimes does include things where there may be a replacement that's more efficient than a prior type of product, but it's still to maintain the existing service levels. Typically, brand new initiatives are not included or financially planned for because they usually arise as expansion requests or things that happen through the year. So it's just something that, you know, just highlighting that that's not typically something that we would plan for. Okay. Not included in our 10-year forecast in our capital plan. There's a few things that I want to talk about a little bit that are, you know, not part of the plan just yet. One of the big conversations that's been happening recently is the Bill 23 impact and some of the changes that the province has rolled out that will impact the city's ability to properly, or to fully, I should say, fully levy development charges the way it has in the past. So some of those differences in that legislation may result or will result in the city having to find alternative funding sources for those projects that were previously going to be funded from development charges. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the discussions, but those impacts are not yet measurable. So we have not included them, but we know that they're there and they're coming. Another thing that's not included in the 10-year forecast is the capital requirements for any discussions around the community hub. We have an expansion request that the CAO will talk about in a subsequent meeting, but it's really, we're still in the planning and preliminary stages. So any capital spending relating to the community hub is not yet part of our capital budget. So just highlighting that. We don't have any funds specifically or explicitly earmarked for industrial land expansions. I'll talk a little bit about the road rehabilitation work. So typically our 10-year capital forecast has addressed the upcoming projects for the next 10 years, but there are a number of other road and linear type projects that have been identified through the asset management plan that are not yet on our radar. So those are things that are not quite yet built into our 10-year forecast that may impact it in future years. We're still working out the impacts and the presentation of how that will come forward for what those needs are. Some of the long-term debt requirements for capital that's being proposed in the 2023 budget. So you'll notice that there is a project relating to the City Hall renovations that's being proposed for approximately $4 million. And we are suggesting, staff are recommending that that be funded through long-term debt, given the size of it and given I would say the long-standing benefit of those renovations. And that's not included in the 2023 budget. Typically, I would include them in the proposed budget, but because it's probably going to take the better part of 2023 to get through those renovations and to sort of figure out what the bottom line is going to look like, go out, tender, do all the sort of work that we have to do for that. We've kind of deferred that inclusion into the 2023 capital, into the 2023 budget. Something I'll highlight for this council is in 2022's budget, a presentation or delegation came from St. Mary's Healthcare Hospital requesting that the city pledge $5 million over 10 years. We currently are in a long-term commitment with the hospice to that expires in 2024. So this is something that's not part of our 2023 or 2024 budget plans, but just it's on the horizon as being an upcoming requirement. Right now, I think the contribution for 2023 off the top of my head is $160,000 or so, or $180,000 towards the hospice, and that's the second last payment of our long-term commitment. But so the $500,000 for St. Mary's when we get there would just be the difference between the two amounts by the time we make that change. And any other strategic initiatives that might arise out of our conversations in the next few meetings, they're not included in there for obvious reasons. Talk a little bit about reserve and reserve funds. So typically the ideal situation is that the city is, in addition to doing its day-to-day operations and replacing its current year capital, it's setting money aside for future stuff. So just wanted to highlight that we have about $47 million in capital reserve funds, which includes some deferred grants that are dedicated to capital. Just deferred being that they haven't, we've received the funding, but we have not yet spent it in the manner in which it's been required. And it also includes development charges that have been collected but not yet expended. So we have about $47.8 million in capital reserve funds. Based on the 2023 budget, we are proposing an additional, or proposing of adding $13 million to those capital reserve funds to support the 2023 budget and future year budgets. So really, we're looking at, a total combination within 2023 of about $60 million at our disposal, so to speak. Some of those funds, deferred grants or development charges, will relate to very specific projects, so they're not necessarily sort of available for 2023's spending, but they are there for that. So, we're looking at $50 million, $60 million of available funding. We've got $33 million proposed in the 2023 budget, and we're looking at about a 10-year forecast of about $372 million in total. Now that excludes some of those extra, I'll call them extra roads that were identified in the asset management plan, but they're not fully fully funded or fully planned for. So the 372 is kind of the number that we're sort of saying is our 10-year forecast. So really, we're looking at, with an average of 37 million a year, and we've got 33 million happening in 2023. and we're raising annually about 13 million. So I'll leave that with you with a little bit of thought, but we'll revisit this in a little bit. But this is just to sort of highlight that while it seems like we have a fair bit of money, we have also a fair bit of expenses and planned capital ahead of us in the coming years. So building on that, using our 10-year forecast of $372 million, if we remove all of the reserve balances that we have available to us, and we plan on contributing to our reserve funds the same amount in 2023 and the next 9 years after that, and we get additional expected development charges and other funding sources to be named or whatever, they might be additional grants or additional shared contributions from partners, that sort of thing. We're looking at coming up with about $213 million in over the next 10 years. Compared to the 372 million, we have a shortfall of about $159 million. So really, it's the point of this is just to really illustrate that, you know, we've got some challenges ahead of us and some funding challenges, but I'll get to this a little bit more with the capital, but you know, if we decide to look at the capital program for 2023 and we decide we're going to defer a project for a year or two, or we're going to, you know, decide that we can live without it for a year or two, that's not going to make a huge difference in our long-term plans. So I just wanted to point that out here. If we include, continuing on with this particular number slide, we've got an annualized shortfall of about 15 million. So really, if we're contributing 13 million, it probably should be more like 18 or 19 million annually, okay, to fully fund our 10-year forecast. I was speaking earlier to someone today, and it wouldn't necessarily be the intent, excuse me, that the city aim for 100% funding of their 10-year forecast, because this is a very fluid document. It's a very much, you know, something that we can make certain decisions on timing for some of these things. We can sometimes stretch extra years out of certain assets and things like that. So it is a fluid thing, but I think we do need to start talking about working towards getting to a less of an annual shortfall. And if we were to include all of the roads that have been identified in these asset management plan, we've got an additional annualized shortfall of another 7 million a year. So it's big, it's scary, but I think it's also manageable based on the proposed budget and where we can move in the next few years with our capital and our reserve transfers. So as I said, we're moving a little bit more towards the sustainability. The 2023 capital budget, or pardon me, the 2023 operating budget includes increases to the transfers to reserves of about $1.5 million net. So we're looking at you know, shrinking that gap annually. So if we continue to do that over the next few years, we'll work our way from being 20% funded for our long-term capital to up to almost 50%. So it's really just kind of trying to build ourselves on a bit of a trajectory for funding our long-term capital. And to the point of long-term debt, you know, as we retire long-term debt and as we pay down our existing long-term debt, we then divert those resources to either additional long-term debt or the capital reserve. So it's not lost, or it's not losing ground in that regard. Okay. So just a bit of a highlight from some of the long-term debt. So some of the repeat customers here may recognize that we did approve in 2022 some additional debt for the Queen Street Storm project, as well as Britannia Phase 2 and a couple of other projects. We were able to draw down some of that long-term debt in 2022, but these two projects remain unfunded at this point. It's the intent that once we've got the 2021 financial statements all completed, that we'll fully draw this down. The 2022 and 2023 budgets include these amounts for principal and interest already. So this is not over and above what we're proposing. This is just to highlight that those loans are not yet undertaken, but the payments are included in the budget. So if we, like, for example, for 2022, we collected $1.7 million in principal and interest through the tax levy. We will just reduce the amount that we need to borrow when it comes time to sign the papers, and we'll just drop that 20 million down by the 1.7 million and carry on. So just so council's aware, that's a bit how that works. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we've got some additional debt being proposed in 2023 that have not been included. So again, this is a bit of a lot of information and a lot of, I'll say, moving parts to this whole process. So just to kind of give a bit of more background to this, the whole process. Talk a little bit about the sort of maximum debt. Lots of, I sometimes hear comments about, you know, well, why don't we just borrow for this or that, or why don't we, like, why don't we not borrow for this or that? So we have some regulations around how much we can borrow and how much we can have as annual repayments. This is just for illustration. Our maximum annual payment is about 15.8 million. Our current is less than that. So we, you know, I think we're about half of that. The amount of the ability, or sorry, the repayment amount is the annual limit, but that's not how much our total borrowings can be. Okay, our total borrowings, it can be however much it takes us to have that level of payment. So that's kind of that's just a bit of context for you. So currently we have about 73 or $74 million in debt. If we were to go to our absolute maximum that the ministry would allow, we would be up to 238 million in debt. I am not recommending this. You will never catch me recommending this level of debt, because even though we have some room to borrow, with the borrowing comes the annual repayment and the cost to the taxpayers on the levy. So, you know, if we were to jump from 74 million up to 240 million, that would be a huge increase on the tax levy just to repay that. So one of the advantages of borrowing, though, is it allows you to do capital works today that you might not have savings set aside for. It allows you to defer or place the costs of those capital works across several upcoming years. So it just spreads it out a little bit. So there are some advantages for long-term debt, but we'll get into that a little bit more as we get through the process. So you know, one of this is sort of the to defer or not to defer. So just to highlight a couple of things about deferring things I mentioned or alluded to earlier, you know, there are very few benefits to deferring capital projects to future years. You know, there's a risk of unplanned failure. There's the risk of increased costs because of inflation, which we've seen hit us fairly largely in 2022 and 2023. It just kind of worsens that whole infrastructure or that funding gap for this and current and future years. And it reduces the overall capacity and discretionary spending for any initiatives or community spending that might arise in that period, because we're forced to contribute more to the capital program. So we also don't know what might arise in future years. Bill 23 is a good example of that. We didn't really see that coming. So, you know, there can be, you know, further impacts that erode our flexibility. So, you know, and once all the assets are captured within our asset management plan and we incorporate those into our forecasting period, we may see that those pressures increase further. So just briefly, I'll touch on the tax supported total. So you've seen these figures in your package. We're looking at a very preliminary increase of 5.8% to the tax levy. After we factor in, you know, at the education rates and look at how the taxes are spread across all the different property types, translates into about 3.55% in a tax rate increase, which works out to approximately $178 per average home assessed at 350. These are really just for illustration, because the number of homes that are really assessed at 350, that is an average based on MPAC's information that we received from their assessment data for our area, but it may not be valid for many ratepayers. So I will also point out that our draft budget still does contain assumptions and estimates that could require adjusting as we move through this process over the next, you know, 3 or 4 meetings. I've got a tracking document that I will share with you each meeting that we will propose those on, but just to kind of give you an idea, you know, insurance premiums. We just received our insurance renewal information from our provider. You know, we were going in with an estimate of 10%. It ended up being more than that. We've got our employee benefits program. We had estimated 2%. It came in at quite a bit higher than that at 12%. So there's just different things that can impact this as we go through. And again, this is a draft budget based on our current services and our current knowledge of information. if council wants to consider new directions, or we are considering some of the expansion requests, that will also do that. I just kind of had that grant funding in there. We operate a lot of the times on assuming that we're going to get the same amount of grants each year from our general operating and even our capital sometimes. So if those were to change, or funding streams were to be diverted to other things at the provincial level, federal level, that could impact us as well. But at this point, we don't know of any of those, but just to highlight that that's a factor. We talked a little bit about what the draft budget does not include. So really, in addition to the list I had before, there's expansion requests being brought forward for council's consideration. The total value of them is about 1.6% additional to the 5.8. And we also have not planned for that, funding deficit or that funding gap fully in the 10-year capital. We haven't considered any specific and direct impacts from Bill 23. So those are things that we could end up having to look at. I will mention that one strategy that's been used by the city of Stratford in the past for expansion requests is where it comes to things like staff. If there's staffing related, is that there is a way for us to sort of split the difference and spread that over a 2-year implementation. So that 1.6 is the full amount based on our expansion request. So we can tinker with that a little bit when we get there if council wants to talk about that. So this is a summary you've seen in your budget package, but it just kind of breaks down where the 5.8% increase has come from and what some of the significant impacts are. So as I mentioned before, with salaries, if we decide to split the difference and spread it over 2 years, we did that last year in 2022. So the $210,000 is amounts that were spread from last year. So they relate to approved positions from 2022. But the financial impact was not fully captured in the 2022 budget. So that's what that is. We've got changes in our full-time wages, part-time wages. I've split them out just for comparison, but really this just relates to movement along the grid. It relates to union contracts and collective agreements and that sort of thing. Changes in benefits. A change that's happened with the benefits, though, is that the OMERS pension plan has expanded to allow part-time employees to be enrolled without meeting a minimum amount of hours threshold. So we don't know totally what that's going to look like because it is voluntary for them. So we've estimated that at around $598,000. Not just for OMERS, but also the benefit increases that we talked about earlier from our health and dental and that sort of benefit packages. We've got a phased in effect for the Britannia 2 build that we entered into in 2022. Again, we're not expecting this to be fully required in 2023 because the build is underway as we speak. So we're expecting to have to get a debt relating to that project, and that is phased in. So that's 50% of the impact for 2023. The other 50% would hit in 2024. So based on the overall transfers to the reserve funds that I've been talking a lot about and will continue to talk a lot about, we've seen an increase of $3.3 million in total. That's offset by a bit of a reduction in our long-term debt. So some of our long-term debt's retired, it's been repaid. So the net change is about $1.3 million in total that relates to that increase. Okay, I haven't broken down every single type of expense, but just wanted to flag some of the big ones, and lumping everything in together for the rest of it is about $1.4 million in total. And I'm calling it inflationary impacts. It's about 2%. That's pretty low considering what inflation is. So we're just trying to show that, there's not a lot of excess in there that we can tinker with, and to try to help offset or mitigate some of that, we have the ability to use prior year surpluses that we have accumulated over the last couple of years, and so we're suggesting that we use 1.5 million of those tax stabilization balances to offset that, to bring it down to the 5.8. There are, this tax stabilization reserve is also used for any unexpected expenses that we might incur during the year. So it's a little bit of I'll say a bit of a cushion in that regard. So that 1.5 million is not the full balance that's available to us right now, but it's using the last, I'm going to say 2019 and 2020 surpluses that were generated for those years. And we can kind of, that's another area where we can kind of have further discussion as to whether or not that's an appropriate amount. So each percentage on the tax levy, so each of those 5.8%, if we want to change that or reduce it or increase it, translates into about $682,000. So if we want to reduce the 5.8 to 4.8, we'd have to find savings or changes to the budget of $680,000. A 1% change translates into about $29 per year on our $350,000 house. So it's not a huge difference per household, but it's certainly there. So since developing the budget package, we have had some new information on some of our items. So I just wanted to kind of review these, and these are what I'm going to be looking for council or committee to make a motion or adopt at the end of my presentation. It's really just to amend the draft budget to reflect some of these. So after we produced the draft budget, we had a change to the police budget that impacts the St. Mary's calculation. If it was $3,000, I probably wouldn't necessarily bring it forward like this, but because it impacts one of our partners, we just wanted to make sure it was completely accurate, so we didn't have any differences later on. So that translates into that. We learned after we produced the package that some of the transit funding we received in 2022 was unspent, and we can carry it over to 2023. So that results in an increase in revenue, so a negative impact, an increase in revenue, but it's also an increase in the expenses because we've just transferred it over from one year to another. So there's no change in the levy. It's an in and an out, but it's just a change in our presentation. So we'll see that change happen in the transit division. We also realized after the budget package went out that we had an amount included in housing division for amortization that was also an in and out. So we're just removing that. It's not, we don't budget for amortization at this stage in our planning lives with municipal finance. We tend to just plan for those transfers to capital reserves instead. So for the replacement. We had a slight reduction in our MPAC levy that they gave us after we released the budget, nothing too huge. We had an adjustment required for our insurance premiums. So again, we projected a 12% increase, but it ended up coming in at 16. So that's the difference, the 22,000. We saw an increase to the Upper Thames Conservation Authority budget that added about another $10,000. So some of these are very minor, but they're just housekeeping, I would call them. An additional one too is like, and again, this was one that we weren't really expecting, is we planned on a 2% increase in our employee benefits package. It ended up being more like 10%. So that's the big change there. So overall, we've got changes proposed to the draft budget of about $173,000, which translates into an additional 0.25%. So what we're asking at this point is that council make the adjustment or authorize the adjustment. So that this becomes our starting point for our next conversation. So I'll leave that until the end of the meeting. So taxes and tax rates, again, just a refresher here, we talked a little bit about this in the orientation, but really this tax levy increase or this 5.8% increase does not translate exactly into the same increase in tax rates because of how rates are calculated based on assessment values, based on assessment classes. Sometimes there's shifts between the various types of property classes. So there's a lot of variables that go into coming up with the tax rate. So that's why when we talk about a 5.8% budget increase, it doesn't translate into the same level of tax rate increase. And as I mentioned earlier, each taxpayer is affected slightly differently. So, if their property value is doubled somebody else's, they may see that their percentage change is slightly different. So it's really just to give a bit of an indication. This is a snapshot from the budget package. I don't need to go over it again, but it just kind of illustrates that the 5.8% levy increase translates into a 3.5%. So if somebody had a $350,000 house in 2022, they would have paid $5,023 in taxes. Based on the proposed budget, they would pay $5,200. These are fairly reasonable estimates, given that we haven't seen any blanket assessment changes from MPAC for the last number of years. So these are, I'll say, pretty legitimate impact increases or impacts for individual properties. So I'll say that for most property owners, they haven't seen a change in their assessment values. So their property was probably worth, if it was worth 350 last year, it's probably still worth 350 unless they had any significant changes to it. So really, some of the other things that we have to consider through the budget process, we continue to focus on the asset management and the capital works, infrastructure planning. We see ourselves as well positioned for growth with our continuing development, which increases taxable assessment base, which also allows those rising costs of services and our infrastructure to be funded across more property types and property owners. So that's the benefit of the growth. It does cost us to put that growth in, obviously, but at the end of the day, those ratepayers are additions to our assessment base. We've got some green initiatives that are helping us reduce the environmental footprint of the city, and that helps our sustainability long term. I say this with a bit of a caution, but even with the tax rate increase as proposed, Stratford's tax rates remain still competitive in the mid-range when we compare ourselves to similar sized cities with similar tax bases. When I say similar tax bases, I mean the same type of percentages or ratios between residential, commercial, industrial. So like if we have the similar split as other cities as that, we can't really compare ourselves to another city that has a higher commercial or industrial base because it's just not a same comparison. And Stratford remains a desirable tourist destination, so we want to keep bringing people here and having them spend their retail dollars in our area, and that supports the residents and business owners of our town. So just something that we, that's the good news part of this whole process. We talk about services for our non-core infrastructure. So that's the things that are not the roads, bridges, and water and sewer. We need to critically be reviewing these, not just for how much they cost us today or how much their initial cost is, but also how much they're going to cost us over the next 10 plus years. Tax rate increases are pretty unavoidable, particularly in the environment of rising inflation. So even if we reduce or eliminate specific services, sometimes we have to consider exit costs relating to contracts or things like that. So just some additional food for thought here. It's not just the operating costs or the impact on the tax levy that we need to think about, but all of those assets that we use to deliver those services. So when we talk about our capital program, which we'll get to shortly, it's really about, tying those assets back to that service level. So tough conversations. We have to continue those around what strategic priorities are affordable and sustainable. So that ends up being, the gist of our budget pain, if you will. So that's just kind of to give you a bit of an overview. I'm happy to take any specific questions that you might have at this point before we carry on with the evening.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. With the screenshot, oh, that's better. Thank you. Now I can see everyone. Are there any questions? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just wondering, and I don't know if this is to Ms. Kruger or to Human Resources, but I'm just wondering regarding the 10% increase in the benefit cost, is this something that did we look around at options when they came back with such a high increase for comparable services or benefits?
I can through the chair, I can speak to that a little bit. That benefit increase is not strictly just for our, health and dental and medical benefits. It includes that OMERS impact that relates to the part-time employees. So it's really not like, it's not strictly the like what I would call the core benefit package. It's all of the things that we provide. It's things like like the health and dental, it's long-term life insurance, it's all of the whole package. So it's not just the one provider that affects that, but I will defer to the Director of Human Resources if she has any specific comments from our relating to our provider.
The director of corporate services is correct. So it encompasses all benefits, including pension, and there was a significant change to OMERS coming into 2023 that we heard about last year, and we're just not sure, as the corporate services director has pointed out to you, what kind of impact this will bring, because it's dependent on whether people want to participate on a part-time basis. But they had a standard that they had to fulfill before they could actively participate. Now they don't. They can do it immediately, so that if you have that participation, that may increase things. The other things with benefits, yes, we always have our broker shop around. Benefits have become extremely expensive. Some of the benefits that weren't in use during COVID, you know, when people couldn't attend to paramedical benefits and things like that because you couldn't go in person, are now back up and running. You know what I mean? So utilization of those benefits is a little bit different coming out of COVID now because we're back not to the same levels that you would have pre-COVID, but getting there, you know what I mean? So that will drive up the cost as well in terms of utilization, your demographic, what they're using. You know what I mean? A younger demographic may use benefits far greater than an older demographic. If they have families, you know what I mean, dependents and that type of thing. So a lot has changed with our demographic. That also drives up the cost of the benefits in terms of utilization and what people are using.
Thank you.
Councillor McCabe.
Through the chair to, I guess, Human Resources, in regard to our benefits program, how do we determine what level of benefits we're given, and how do we compare to other municipalities in relationship?
Oops, hold on a sec. I'm sorry about that. To respond to your question, we are amongst our comparators. We are pretty much at the same level. We aren't over extended. You know what I mean? So, like I said, in being able to compete, you know what I mean, for talent and offering the benefits plan that draws people to the city. So we're not above the norm, you know what I mean? We're certainly within the range of our comparators, and in some cases less than our comparators, you know what I mean? And we try to kind of contain those costs. And I think, as you saw when we negotiated the last collective agreement that you were privy to, those are things that we try to do, or build in cost containment measures, you know, as we start this process. So the level of benefits sometimes are directed by, you know, collective agreements, you know, and what's been negotiated historically. Non-union staff kind of follow along the same lines as union staff. So we try to kind of keep them relatively the same. So on average, I think we kind of meet our comparators. And remember, our comparators aren't larger municipalities like Kitchener-Waterloo and London. It's more like Woodstock, some of the smaller municipalities, you know what I mean? So we try to compete, you know what I mean, but we're in no position, you know, against a larger corporation, you know what I mean, that can offer much more. But we're within the range of our competitors.
Okay. Any more questions? Nope. Okay, let's move on. Our next item is 7.1, the transit and parallel transit report. And could I call for a motion to receive that report? Oh, sorry. I see the clerk has her hand up. Yes, Ms. Defoe.
Through the chair, prior to moving to item 7.1, is it possible to receive a motion that the treasurer be directed to incorporate the amendments as outlined in the presentation into the draft 2023 budget?
Thank you. My apologies. That's moved by Councillor Burback. Do I have a second? Councillor McCabe, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. All right, if I'm okay now to move on to 7.1, I will do that. Thank you, and I'll turn this over to our manager. Oh, I need a motion to accept that report. I believe Councillor Henderson has moved that, seconded by Councillor Beattie. All in favor of receiving the report? And that's carried. Okay, so I'll turn it to our manager of transit.
All right, thank you very much. And through the chair, just a brief overview. I have actually two reports that I need to present to council tonight that as far as the budget deliberations, as far as these will be, that's why I'm kind of doing it now, so that once we get to the community services part in transit, you'll have all the information that you need. The first report, the previous council asked me after the fees and bylaw or the fees and charges were passed, they had asked myself to come up with the financial implications as far as whether we keep the 2022 rates on the passes or we proceed to the 2023 rate that was passed by the previous council. So just to give you some background, presently we have, and it's only the passes that are going up. They last were increased back in 2019. I'm recommending that the present passes, which are $57 for a 30-day, which is the student, affordable, and senior pass, and the adult pass is $67. I'm looking for direction, as mentioned, as far as should we be increasing them by $3 each for the month or for the 30 days, which equates to one ride a month because each single ride is $3. It's the main reason for this, in my mind, is, and we've talked about this a lot through departments. The Director of Corporate Services just mentioned about inflation. Of course, insurance has gone up. The other thing is fuel, and I'll use fuel as an example. Of course, it's diesel fuel for all our buses, to where a year ago or just over a year ago, I was paying 92 cents a liter through the buying group, which we get a discount. Presently now we're approaching $1.60 through the buying group, so we're almost double the cost in fuel than it was a year ago. Transit isn't 100% a cost recovery service. It's more deemed as a service, and just so for those that are aware, the fares, the revenue that we bring in cover about 1/3 of the operating expenses. So that's really the main reason. I listed on page 2 that based on about 8,000 passes we sell in a year, that equates to about $48,000 in additional revenue. And the mobility, which is a 10 ride card, which is a different type of pass than we offer for transit, it's about $1,000 increase. So it might not sound a lot, and it will make a little bit of a dent in our operating, only due to, like I mentioned before, fuel's expensive, insurance, parts, everything is pretty much increased 20-30% in some cases. So basically, I'm just looking for direction from committee as far as my recommendation is to increase it by the $3, but I'm looking for direction as far as whether we want to keep the 2022 rates or proceed to the 2023 rates, which I haven't increased yet because I was waiting for this. So we're still presently at the 2022 rates, but going forward, we'll just be looking for some direction. And I'm open to any questions anyone might have.
If I could, one moment, Councillor Henderson, just ask the clerk, do we need a motion to accept that and then proceed to discussion, or do we proceed to discussion directly?
Through the chair, you're welcome to ask questions of the manager now. I would just clarify that if the fees are to remain as currently in the fees and charges bylaw, which included the increase, then no direction is required. If committee would like to recommend the fees be decreased, then we would need a motion to amend the fees and charges bylaw, and I'm happy to assist with any required wording for the motions.
Thank you. So I'll open the floor to discussion then. Councillor Henderson.
I have a couple questions. Mike, if you had a chance, through the chair, Mike, if you had a chance to look at when in the future, as we switch over to electric buses, do you see the possibility that we will be able to decrease if we, it'll be much cheaper to recharge them? I know it'll be very expensive to start it, to get it all implemented. But do you see in the future that there might be a possibility of reduction in fees because of going electric? Or have you
through-
looked at that?
Through the chair, good question, Councillor Henderson. The cost for electric buses, I won't dwell on this too much, is almost double the cost of a regular transit bus now. That pays for itself over time, as electric power is way far cheaper than fossil fuel. There's a big commitment financially up front, but over time, it will become a lot more cost effective. So if future council wishes to decrease, once we start seeing those savings, to bring those rates down, that'll be the wish of future council down the road. So.
And my other question was, I believe we sort of capped the rates, I think it was for 3 years, on the youth for, like, you know, parks and transit and swimming and things like that. And you're saying that, you know, if we got a $3 rate, I'm wondering if there's a possibility that we could maybe do it halfway and, you know, come up with, say, $1.50, which won't be the total amount, but still wouldn't be such a hardship on people that have to use the buses. It's just an idea.
And through the chair, whatever council wishes to, you know, if we want to rescind the past bylaw, change the program and how the fares work, that's we can do whatever council wishes. But making it even a little bit more affordable for the students is something that is a good idea.
Well, and it makes it really hard when you've got 2 or 3 children using the buses. And my understanding is the grade 7 and 8s, they still get subsidized by the school if they're a certain mileage away from the school, right? But it's once you go into high school that the parents have to take over paying, right?
Right, that's correct. Through the chair, basically and I did some calculations from 2022, about 57% of our passes sold are to the students. And a good portion of that is bought by the Avon District School Board for the grade 7 and 8s. I would say easily probably 60 to 70% of those student passes are purchased through the board. It works out to be 250, 300 passes a month on average that the board buys to give to those students that live within a certain criteria or a certain distance from the school. They provide that transportation option for them.
Have you ever heard of other municipalities that partners step forward and sponsor the students for bus passes? Is there any, do you ever hear any talk of that? I know that at one time I heard Orangeville was subsidized by the mall because the bus drove out to the mall and came back. But I wonder if there's any programs like that, you know, maybe some businesses in town or whatever would like to sponsor the student section of transit. Have you heard of anything like that?
Through the chair, here and there, I know there's tuition passes through the universities, but that's part of your tuition that you pay for. So I don't know if I would necessarily call that subsidized because you're paying for it anyway. I have heard not too many programs that are subsidized through transit. I know through PC Connect, which is my other hat that I wear, we're looking at through Intra and the inter-community transportation projects that we're looking at businesses to help subsidize those, although it's a completely different type of service. But it is transit, but it is different than the city transit. So I can't say I've heard a lot necessarily about subsidizing transit from the private sector, at least in the city anyway. And I really haven't heard too much through Opta or from CUDA that's something that's been talked about.
Thank you. Any other questions relating to a proposed fare increase? I have Councillor Seven, then Councillor Burbach.
Thank you. Through the chair. I'm just wondering, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if you don't have the information, that's fine. But I'm wondering if Mr. Mosley, if you said the last time it went up was 2019 or it hasn't gone up since then. Do you know how much it went up at that time, and how much like the previous year? Is this something that goes up every year typically, or, and do you know how much the last increase was by chance?
Through the chair, I have some of that information. So in 2019, only the passes went up, and I believe it was $2. I think they were 55 and 65 at the time. Cash fares and ticket fares, they went up the beginning of 2021. They went up a quarter, 25 cents each. Basically, in the years that I've been here, it seems to kind of take about every 3 years that we'll put an increase up. Some years we didn't, but in the last few years they've gone up by, like I said, a quarter for cash or ticket, and $2 back in 2019 was the last time a pass was increased.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Burbach.
Thank you. Through the chair. So some of the discussion that we had with the previous council was that people who are using transit typically are youth and they're seniors, the people on fixed incomes, and that the percentage increase, which I calculated to be about, it's 4 or 5%, depending on which fare you're looking at. But the concern was that it does place additional strain on people who have fixed incomes, and inflation's going up, and this is just another sort of straw that might break that camel's back. So the thought was that if we froze the prices as they are, then it would, I did some rough calculations, and I think it's 0.06% of our total budget that 48,000 represents. So it is a very, very, very small amount of our total budget that we would be subsidizing. So I'd like to make a motion that we would keep the transit fares at their current rate for this year, and so that we can support people who do use this service.
I was going to ask the clerk for her.
Through the chair, to clarify, so in 2022, the fees and charges bylaw was adopted, which included the increase to the transit passes. If council would like to freeze the rates to the 2022 levels, then we will require a motion to amend the fees and charges bylaw. And my apologies, I do have a draft.
Okay.
That the fees and charges bylaw 128-2022 as amended be further amended to reduce the transit fare rates to the 2022 levels, and that the clerk be directed to prepare the required bylaw for consideration at the January 23rd, 2023 regular council meeting.
That's exactly the motion I was thinking of. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Actually, I'll wait. I'll see if someone wants to second it before I speak.
Councillor Henderson, you're seconding the motion? We do have a seconder.
Okay.
Councillor Beattie.
I will speak then. Thank you. Through the chair. For those that are keeping score, and I hope everybody's got pen and paper handy here, folks, because this is the first night of finance. So I will be speaking against this motion. This here, as proposed motion, it automatically kicks $48,000 of revenue. So we just be mindful as we go through all these deliberations. Every time we look to either cut or amend, we have to be mindful that every dollar counts. We already heard from our director of the situation that we're heading into. And so it's only $1.50 or $3 here or $3 there. But when it comes to the big picture, it's $48,000 this year of revenue that we're missing. So I appreciate the concerns of being mindful of every person in Stratford, but we also have to run a city. So again, I understand the concern of wanting to save $3 a month on a pass, but we also have to keep these buses running along with every other service. So again, I'll be speaking against this motion.
Thank you. Councillor McCabe.
I think to the point that Councillor Beattie, through the chair, is making, and looking at the budgets previously and the lack of raising of the tax levy in the years prior to this, which led to such a large increase last year. I agree. We're basically just punting at this particular moment, and I certainly wouldn't support continuing that in that frame.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? I do have a comment on this, and according to the rules, I'm to step away as chair at this point, and I'd like to ask Councillor McCabe as vice chair to stand in my stead so that I could provide argument on this.
Okay.
Thank you. I agree with the fare increase because of the increased costs. While I'm sympathetic to the people who use transit, by denying an increase, we are effectively increasing the subsidy. We're not holding the subsidy steady. It is an effective increase. So I will also be voting to defeat the motion that's on the floor. Thank you. And I think I'm allowed to be chair again. Any further question or comment? All right, thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor, which is to hold the rates at the current level. We have a seconder for that motion. Could I call for if there's no further discussion, then I'll call for a vote on that motion. All in favor of holding the rates where they are now? It looks like we have 3 in favor, all opposed. And that motion is defeated. With that in mind, could I call for a motion then to increase? And I have that moved by Councillor Beattie. Do I have a seconder on that motion? Councillor McCabe. Oh, my apologies, Councillor Beattie. You wanted to speak?
Actually, if I may, I think my motion is quite simple, and that is to approve the 2023 transit fare rates as proposed. If I'm looking to the clerk, if that's the correct motion.
I'll turn to the clerk.
Through the chair, the increase was already approved, so no further action is required at this time.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So then that leads us to our second report, which is in relation to the Saturday fixed route full service versus on-demand service. And I'll turn that back to our manager of transit.
All right, very good. Thank you. And through the chair, I can, for the newer members of council, I can give a little bit more background as far as how we evolved to on-demand in the first place, but I'll keep it brief because there's a lot of information in here that I need to go over so that everyone on council has kind of my thought process as far as you know, the direction that I think we should go. So for the newer members, on-demand started on Sundays back in July of 2020. It wasn't a response to COVID at the time because I'd actually been looking at that prior to mid-late 2019. The Sunday on demand was solely for wasn't a big ridership day, and again it was still offering a solid service delivery and trying to cut back on some costs at the same time. With that working as well as it did, we then moved to Saturday on demand, which was in February of 2021. That again, it was kind of a two-step approach. It was during COVID. It was during stay-at-home responses, essential trips only, educational facilities. They were doing remote learning. There was a lot of things going on in 2021. Also, it was a budgetary guiding factor as well as the council of the day were also looking for some cost savings as far as the budget in 2021. This recognized by going to Saturdays on demand made a substantial decrease in the budget lines as far as operating. There, the past council asked me to kind of do a financial impact of what it would look like if we went back to a full service on a Saturday compared to remaining to be on demand. And there's several factors that we need to consider if we're giving some thought to going back to full service. The first thing, and I mentioned this in my first report, is cost of fuel. So if, just to give you an idea, if we run all 7 routes, which is 32 trips a day in a regular service day, it's about 2,400, almost 2,500 kilometers total in a service day that the buses travel. On demand on a Saturday only goes where it needs to go. We on average travel between 1,100 and 1,200 kilometers. So we do half the distance. And the buses aren't empty. Might only be 1 or 2 on there, but the buses have a purpose and only go and do the pickups and only travel in the best way to get from point A to point B. And they move when there's a purpose to go, or they move when there's a purpose in their dispatch to go somewhere. So we literally travel half the kilometers in a day, which as far as a fuel savings, especially at this point of time, is a big factor. We also have to consider that back before that we started on demand, the number 7 that was introduced in 2018 didn't run Saturdays. It only ran Monday to Friday. The response for on demand on Saturdays and Sundays, for that matter, for people that get to work that didn't have that option before, whether it's in the Wright Industrial Park, whether it's Stackpole, whether it's a business on Griffith Road, they didn't have that option before because we didn't run the 7 on Saturdays. With on demand, we cover the entire city. We take people on demand first thing in the morning. We take them for the afternoon shifts. We pick them up at 7 o'clock at night. We have numerous calls on a weekend for work related, especially in the Wright Industrial Park, that they didn't have that option before we started on demand. The other issue that might even be a tougher one, besides the cost, I mean, the cost is, I listed here, it's about 150. It could be higher than that. That's probably a very conservative number as far as what it would cost me annually to put in a full service day on a Saturday as fuel starts to increase. The other thing is labor. I would need at least about 8 additional staff to run Saturdays. So that's another shift on afternoons. Presently, we run with 6 drivers now because they're staggered throughout the day on demand. To run a full service and include the number 7 that we didn't have before, and to include a break person, which we don't need for on demand, I would need an additional 8 operators to run that service. The issue, I think we all know globally in every sector, it's hard to recruit talent. We've had to think out of the box. You'll see some expansion requests, which are a little bit thinking out of the box as far as retaining staff and recruiting in the future. There was a time where I had lineups at my office door and people dropping off resumes. The last couple of years, not so much. I've had postings online for months and months and months, and literally no one has even applied or even picked up the phone and called me. It is very tough, especially with transit. There's a certain skill set that I'm looking for to drive a bus. And it's not just to drive a bus, there's many other skills that are involved. Recruiting at this point in time is very tough. And I think we all know what recruiting's like, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's transit. It is very, very difficult. And to find 8 part-time people or 8 staff, and then, oh, by the way, you're just working Saturdays, that's going to be very, very tough to recruit for that. It's a specific pool that I draw from, and where I draw from, those wells are dried up. Usually it's places like First Student. That's usually a big draw for me. A lot of people come from First Student. We all know that First Students is struggling day to day on staffing as far as hiring. So industry wide, it's very, very tough to find the talent that we need. And it could take a very long time to get the people recruited that I need to do a Saturday full service. Not to say let alone the cost that's involved. It's a solid service. Staff put a lot of effort every weekend to make sure that people get to where they need to go in a timely fashion. We have a core set of people that call every Thursday and Friday. The ones that might not necessarily have the means to do it themselves on a mobile phone or to book it on a laptop, they might not have those means. We talk to the same core group that call all the time Thursday, Friday to book their trips on Saturday and Sunday. Our on-time performance for on-demand outweighs our Monday to Friday service, only because Saturdays and Sundays we can go whatever direction we want. We don't have to follow a route and get have to deal with weather in certain instances, or construction. Construction needs to be done, but we can take other ways to get where we need to go. So I know I've said a lot. There's some implications going back to a full service, and the ridership is still not. If you read anything about Transit Anywhere, like TTC, they're like at 47% of before COVID. Places like London, I talk to all the time. No one's got the ridership back. Like Councillor Henderson mentioned on my other report, a general year for us prior to 2019 was over 600,000 rides in a year. We're 20% less than that. I crunched the numbers for 2022, and we're 20% less than what we were prior to COVID. So that equates to about 120,000, 130,000 less rides per year at this point in time. Will we ever get back to the 600,000 mark? I hope so. It's hard to tell. Every transit agency right now is struggling with trying to get ridership back, but it could be a very long process. Most analysts in the industry says, well, we've kind of gone back 15 years from a ridership perspective. We might get some new ones. We might not ever get some of the past riders. Things change, lives change. They may not need transit as much as they used to, but basically, we were, if you wanted the number, we're about 472,000 rides last year compared to the usual 600 to 620,000 that we used to see. So my recommendation is let's remain status quo. It's a solid service. Staff put a lot of work into it. The drivers have got it down to a science now. We interact with a lot of customers that call. We get probably 40, 50 calls on a Saturday. Our on-time percentage is phenomenal for weekends. It's not perfect, and don't get me wrong, the fixed route isn't perfect. There's nothing that is perfect, but we put a lot of effort into make sure we deliver the best type of service, whether it's fixed route or whether it's on demand. We spend a lot of time making sure people get to where they need to go safely. So basically, my recommendation is remain status quo, and we keep the on-demand service for Saturdays as it runs presently. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Part of what I wanted to hear also was the difference between before COVID, when we had Saturday ridership, compared to, well, we're sort of coming out of the COVID now. How does that compare to the Saturday on demand? Like, does the difference help to make up the difference with the ridership? I hear a lot of people complain that there was more people riding the buses on Saturday. And I think sometimes it's mostly around the Christmas season that they say that, but.
Okay, through the chair. So, I mean, ridership is down. So I could give you numbers on what compare a Saturday now to a Saturday 3 or 4 years ago, but I could also give you a Tuesday now compared to 3 or 4 years ago. And Tuesday would look light, a Saturday would look light, present speaking. I could give you Thursday, because we are, like I mentioned before, we're 20% less than what we were 4 years ago. So to put it in perspective, we are down every day. Saturday, Sunday, Fridays, every day is not as what it was 4 years ago. So I think we need to, we can pick out certain days of the week and see that ridership is low. We can pick out a Saturday, Sunday and say, yeah, it's lower than what it used to be, but every day is lower than what it used to be. So I kind of put it in perspective of total ridership, and include the fixed route service as well, because those days are lower than what they used to be too. It's lower across the board. So it's kind of hard to compare because we're not at the 600 or 620,000 riders yet. We're only 472,000. So it's kind of hard to compare the two when we're not at the levels that we were 4 years ago.
So would you say it's down around 20% then on the Saturday? Approximately?
Through the chair, it's ridership is down 20%, like across the board.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Beatty was first, I believe, and then Councillor Burback.
Thank you, through the chair. I would make the motion that we receive the report and that the on-demand service remain for this Saturday transit service.
Thank you. I have a seconder, Councillor McCabe. All in favor of the motion on the floor?
Through the chair, if I could, if you could open it up for discussion. I believe Councillor Burback had her hand raised.
My apologies, Councillor Burback. Your question, please.
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair, I had a couple of questions for Mr. Mosley. Just curious about, I know you don't want to compare, but can we compare Sunday to Saturday? So like the Sunday on demand to the Saturday on demand, is it higher on Saturdays?
Through the chair, yes, it is higher ridership on a Saturday, only maybe probably due to it's a longer service day. So we start 6 a.m. on Saturday and finish at 8. On Sundays, we start at 9:30 and go till 6. So it's a little bit shorter of a day. And Sundays is kind of low ridership. Mostly everyone kind of, they do their chores or their shopping or whatever they need on a Saturday, not so much on Sunday. I would say ridership on Sunday is pretty much going to work, I would think, if I had to pinpoint it. Okay.
The other, I guess, comment or question, it seems like the on-demand is the way to go for now. But looking forward, if we did want to expand, would you ever consider a hybrid? So maybe having a few fixed routes that go to, the mall or the factory area, rather than bringing all the routes back, just have a certain fixed route. Or I know other transit systems will have like a reduced schedule. So like they'll go every hour instead of every 15 minutes, or maybe looking at some of those hybrid models moving forward. Would that be possible? In addition to on-demand.
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, through the chair. Actually, we did try that once. We did it was about a year and a half ago. We did a Huron East End back and forth for about 7 hours on a Saturday, and it was still in the midst of COVID, so it was really kind of hard. It didn't really. The uptake on that really wasn't as much as I figured it was going to be, because a lot of people seem to travel east-west because all the retail's out in the East End. Most people are coming from the West End. It really didn't take as much as I thought it was going to be, but it was kind of the sign of the times as well. With stay-at-home orders, nobody was really doing anything. Staff, we've looked at kind of looked at different ideas of making a hybrid, potentially once, we get ridership back up to where we think it needs to be, that we could come up with some kind of hybrid in the future. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So were there any further questions then before we return to the motion on the floor? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Through the chair, I do have a number of questions, if I may. I guess my first is to follow up on Councillor Henderson's question. I think I would be interested to know, because I understand that ridership is down 20%, but I'm interested to know if there is an impact that we can see from this changeover from fixed route to on demand. I'm interested to know if that has affected ridership. And so if you do happen to have the numbers, is it a comparable drop on Saturdays as it would be to a Tuesday or another day? I'm just wondering if it's more or less the same, or if it's more significant of a drop.
Through the chair, I would strongly suggest that it's 20% almost every day across the board. Like you can compare Monday would be 20% less. It's a little different when you get the long weekends though. Ridership there really isn't much on a long weekend, but they're kind of few and far between. But generally speaking, it's 20%.
Okay, thank you. And then through the chair, if I have a few more questions regarding the staff and the need to hire additional staff. I'm just wondering if you could clarify or explain a little further, because we didn't reduce staff when we changed to on demand. Is that correct?
So through the chair, presently I have 6 drivers that operate on demand on a Saturday. To increase it to a full service day, which would be 2 shifts, so it's like 6 to 1 and then 1 till 8. I would need those 6 drivers. Let's say they worked in the morning, then I would need an additional to run the 7. Then I would need 7 to work the afternoon shift, and then a break person as well. So that's how we come up with that number. Because I also use part-time staff during the week for school specials, to cover illness, to cover full-time vacations. Of course, they need some rest or break period, so they can't, because part-timers perform the service on the weekend. So they're basically available to fill spaces 7 days a week. So in order to do a full service on a Saturday, I need additional staff, because the full-time staff is Monday to Friday. Part-time staff covers the seven service days where there's gaps.
Okay, and has that changed? I'm just wondering where the staff, because I don't think we've gotten rid of that many staff since on demand came in. I'm just wondering what happened to has that changed, that now only full-time staff do Monday to Friday? Did it used to be that they covered Saturday as well?
So through the chair, so back in the day, part of the cost saving measures from 2 years ago was to completely change the operating schedule as what it was then. And because depending where you are on the pay grid, the part-timers generally don't make as much as the full-timers. So that was the cost recovery. And there was opportunities at that time to not replace certain positions because we were going to this on-demand model.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have, if I may, through the chair, I just have a couple more questions. The projected savings noted in the report of 210,000, has that materialized? And is that including, we've had to the additional hire of the weekend supervisor? So do you have the numbers that how it's all kind of come together? Like, did we end up saving 210,000, or did things come down where we had to hire additional supervisor and things like that?
And through the chair, just so for the first go around, when we recognized the savings 2 years ago when we introduced this, Yes, the projection was 210, but it was actually more than that.
And does that include the hiring of the weekend supervisor that we had to bring on for the on-demand?
Through the chair, that was the 2021 budget number. The supervisor we hired halfway through last year. And that would be, I'd have to look at those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it potentially would have dipped into the 210 plus that we'd saved from the prior year.
Okay. And then I just have one more question, and then I'm gonna just speak about my position on the motion. I'm just wondering, have we ever done a cost per ride analysis for on-demand? Has that been something that we've looked at or something that we could look at?
Through the chair, it's revenue per ride. They'd be in the CUDA stats that I give CUDA numbers, ridership numbers. Gives us revenue per passenger hour, revenue per service hour, but it doesn't. It's just as the service. It doesn't break it out necessarily as a comparator from this service to this service. It's just one number through based on how many service hours we provide, how many labor hours we provide, how many riders. There's a lot of stats that CUDA develops that gives us revenue per hour. Usually I'd have to go back and look, but I can get that information for you. Although the last few years, of course, are a little are not great, because 2021 we only did 303,000 rides, so we were 50%. Last year we were 472, so it to take the last couple years with very low ridership probably won't say a whole heck of a lot, because it doesn't divide it up between types of service.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there for now, and if anyone else wants to speak, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ward-Dofa, I see a hand on your screen. Do you have a question?
I want to say thank you first, Mike, what you're doing. You're managing a lot of change with our transit bus in our area, I mean, in our city. I have my just maybe suggestion or maybe advice. Is that any like mini bus, like maybe Sunday and Saturday, then instead of to just like big bus, I know it's a lot of gas, like maybe mini bus, like only for in the weekend. That's any opportunity.
Yes, and through the chair, and good question, Councillor Rodolfo. So basically a smaller bus with a smaller engine doesn't necessarily, because it works harder, it is not necessarily going to save that much in fuel, and it's really only 6 seats less than a 40-footer. So and I've explained to a lot of people, because I get a lot of feedback from customers about, yeah, we see buses empty all the time, and why don't you get smaller buses? And it's like I tell them, it's only about $150,000 less to purchase one. They're only 6 less seats, and they're a smaller unit and works harder. And at the end of the day, empty is empty, whether it's a 40-footer or a 35-footer. It's the optics, and empty is empty. Once we get more into electrification, which is a little bit down the road, but not that far, we're going to be looking at smaller buses in the 35-foot range when we get to the point where we're going to be totally electric buses, probably in the next several years. So I'll be looking at smaller buses then. Right now, I could get smaller buses, but I'd have nowhere to put them, because the garage, the facility, the bus storage is completely maxed out. And for those that recall when we talk about bike racks, it is so tight in the garage, I can't even put bike racks, or a bus would have to sit outside. So it's smaller buses down the road when we become electrification, when they're battery electric buses, we'll be definitely looking at the smaller ones, only because the electric 40-foot buses are actually 41 feet, which might present a problem, but that's for another conversation later. But yes, Councillor, we're going to look at smaller ones down the road when they're electric.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I see none. I think Councillor Seven, you had a comment you wish to address?
And Joan Thompson has her hand up too.
Yeah, if Ms. Thompson could speak first. Thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you.
Thompson.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to provide some clarification with respect to the hiring of the part-time weekend supervisor for transit. Just wanted to clarify that it was not specifically for the on-demand service. It was to provide an enhanced level of supervision on the weekends, plus to give our current manager and our current supervisor relief from having to work most weekends to provide those supervisory services. So I just wanted to clarify that that part-time supervisor was not specifically for on-demand.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just want to, I'm going to speak against the motion. I think ultimately for me, this is the Sunday on demand began as a cost saving measure during budget discussions that came up. And I don't, you know, well, I'll just say that I think we should be trying to make transit more accessible and more convenient for people to increase ridership, because this is not a cost recovery. This is something that we will always be subsidizing. And I think I would like to see us working towards making it more convenient and more accessible. I think staff are doing a very good job. I think it's just the convenience of going out and waiting at the bus stop, knowing that it's coming at certain times will never be, it will never be as convenient as that. And so I think for me, the answer is smaller buses running, even if they're just running on the weekends, as Council Ordofa alluded to, and it's not making it more complicated to ride transit. So for those reasons, I will be voting against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Henderson.
I just wanted to confirm something. People have to phone in on Saturday and Sunday to catch the bus. And the bus drivers, my understanding was they go quickly, but they kind of follow the same route. Do they pick people up if they happen to see somebody standing at a bus stop that maybe didn't realize that there's on demand? Maybe they don't use it all the time or something?
Through the chair, good question. So you have options. You can either load the app on your cell phone, or if you have a computer or laptop, you can book your own ride when you want. If you don't have that technology, you can call into the office where they're all weekend long. We can book it for you. So it goes into the system, and if they call in, let's say, the dispatcher will tell them, okay, so between 2 and 2:15, the bus will be there if you say you booked it for 2 o'clock. And that's basically how it works. I would say the majority of people look after booking it themselves, and have come very, very knowledgeable on how the system works. We don't necessarily get as many phone calls as we once used to, let's say a year ago, as most people have figured out how to navigate the system and how to use it, and they can book several rides at a time. They can book 2 weeks in advance if they want. Did that answer your question, Councillor?
No, I'm just talking about, you know, say my car broke down today and I just walked over to the bus stop and thought, oh, I'll catch the bus, and not even realizing it's Saturday or something. Would the bus driver, if he's passing me, pick me up?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that part of it. Through the chair, yes, we don't pass anyone. That happens a lot, like at Walmart or Food Basics out in the West End. If there's someone standing there, even though there might only be the one person that booked the ride for that bus, because if you have the app, it'll tell you what bus is coming. It'll tell you the unit number. But if there's 3 people standing there, we'll board them all and we'll just put into the tablet where everyone's going. That driver will radio over the air and say, you know what, if anyone's got someone picking up at Walmart, I've picked up 2 passengers there, you don't need to worry about it. So they clear their screen. There's a lot of communication throughout weekends as far as the drivers go, but we don't pass anyone and leave them there. We'll stop and pick people up. And then if that wasn't their bus, then we just need to input where they need to go and we'll take them right there.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Seven, do you have another question?
Thank you. Through the chair, I just had a follow-up to what Mr. Mosley is talking about. I just wanted to clarify, though, that the buses are not necessarily going by every stop on a Saturday or a Sunday.
That's correct. Through the chair. So if you're on a main road where you see buses all the time, if your car breaks down on Greenwood, let's say, that might be a bad example, but let's say somewhere maybe deep in a residential area where there's bus stops, because we don't follow a route, the chances are if you're that deep in a residential area just waiting at a bus stop, a bus might not ever come by. It would kind of depend on where you're standing, but if you're in the core, you're around the terminal, sometimes we do travel bits and parts of routes just to get from point A to point B, to where we might find somebody. Although I can't remember the last time I had a phone call with someone saying that I waited for a bus on Saturday and it never appeared. Maybe back in the early days when this started, but I certainly haven't heard any of that recently.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, and for people watching too, that they don't expect something that's different than. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Looks like none. If I could, I'd like to ask the clerk, there is a motion on the floor, if we could maybe have that reread, because it was a while ago.
Through the chair, certainly. So the motion on the floor that was moved by Councillor Beattie and seconded by Councillor McCabe is that the report titled Financial Comparison Saturday Fixed Route Full Service versus On-Demand Service be received for information, and that on-demand service remain for Saturday transit service.
Thank you. So the motion's on the floor. Can we take a vote all in favor of the motion? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I believe that motion's carried with 7 votes. Should I request the opposed as well?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So, thank you. So all opposed to the motion. 1, 2. We have 2 opposed. Is that math correct? Am I missing someone? Sorry.
Through the chair, you could call the question again, all in favor. If we could ask all the members of council to clearly raise your hand in front of your face so that we can see it in the screen, and then call any opposed again.
All right, I'll call the question again. All in favor of the motion on the floor? 1, 2, 3, 2, 6, 7. Oh, there are 8 in favor. All opposed? And that's 2. So the motion is carried. Thank you. All right, our next item then is getting into the capital budget overview. And at this point, I would like to return to our manager or director of corporate services to lead us through the next part of the meeting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Henderson, you're waving.
Could we have a 5-minute break?
Sure. I'm not sure the procedure. I'll ask the clerk, but.
Through the chair, so we simply note that the Finance and Labor Relations Committee budget meeting will recess for 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, you'll then resume the meeting.
All right, thank you. So I have 7:19 now. We'll resume at 7:24. And
Thank
do
you.
I need a, oh, thank you. I have a question for the clerk in terms of proceeding. Oh, I see Councillor Wardoffer's back. I think we're waiting for one more. Just on in terms of we're past the time we agreed to resume, and a question about appropriate procedure. Should we wait a little more for Councillor Niger to return, or?
Through the chair, you do have quorum, so you can proceed with the meeting, and then hopefully Councillor Niger is able to join again.
All right, thank you. So I think we should continue with the idea, and we've got a pile to get through, but so we won't get to all of it tonight. We did have a longer meeting yesterday, and we're fairly far into this one. So if people find they are flagging, at some point we will need to, I think, pause and then carry on at the next meeting. If people find they're running out of gas, let me know, and we can take the pause at that point. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to our Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll try and be mindful of the timing as well. So I'd like to suggest that we can perhaps get through a couple of these early smaller divisions before we take a break for the evening, but we'll certainly play it by ear. So moving into the 2023 capital budget overview. So we talked a little bit about this in my presentation, but I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to their budget package in the capital tab. You know, where we're going to start off there. So I talked a little bit about it in the presentation already, so I'm not going to rehash it very much, but the very first page in that capital summary is the overall 10-year forecast. So if you reference the bottom of that page numbered 1, in the top bottom right-hand corner, the total funding required and total project costs is $633 million over the 10 years. So just want to keep kind of reminding and referring back to that bigger picture. Part of that summary is, made up of all of the various divisions and the various departments that are listed in your agenda that we'll try to work through. So the basic process is that we'll go through each division, starting with corporate services. So I'll kind of pave the way for this one, and where each director will then take a few minutes to just do a brief overview of their division to give particularly new counselors, but maybe returning counselors as well, and members of the public a bit of a sense of the areas of responsibility that their areas cover, and then jump into the capital forecast. So I can start off with that particular process with the corporate services, and yeah, we'll carry on. Maybe before I do that, yeah, so the first couple of pages in the capital program section of the binder, the summary of is the very first page, and then the second page I also talked about in the presentation, where it shows the like some of the funding challenges that we have. The purpose of these documents is really just to illustrate that once we get into the capital program and we start to talk about individual projects, changing or deferring or sliding one from one tier to another probably isn't going to make a huge amount of difference in the overall big budget picture, but it's just a bit of a point of reference. So before I get into that, I'll start off with introducing myself. I'm Carmen Kruger. I'm the director of the Corporate Services Division and the treasurer for the city. I've been with the city for 17 months. It's my second draft budget delivery for council. And I have about 15 years working in municipal finance since obtaining my accounting designation. So here at the city, the Corporate Services Division is comprised of the clerks and related legislative services, the information technology or IT department, and the finance department as well. So just as a broad sort of summary, finance is responsible for all aspects of the revenue and expense management, including accounts payables, receivables, property tax administration, purchasing, and payroll. We manage the cash and investments of the city. We do the banking, the long-term debt, reserves and reserve fund management, look after development charges, and really anything that has a financial element to it. There's many types of reporting that the finance department is responsible for, both internally and externally, including preparing information for council, for departments, for our year end, for our auditors, grant and ministry reportings, just to name a few. That's kind of the finance department there. The IT division is tasked with managing all the data and security within the city and provides software and hardware support for staff and for council, maintains the city's website structure, and looks after a lot of the licensing and updates for the city's various software solutions. These overviews, by the way, are not going to be comprehensive in nature, but just to give a sense of some of the the areas where you may see some capital and you may see some operating revenues or costs. The clerk's division is responsible for the council committee, subcommittee, and advisory committee meeting agendas and minutes and other supports to the governance structure. They run the election process every 4 years and are responsible for ensuring good records management. They respond to freedom of information and privacy requests, perform civil marriage ceremonies, and wear many other hats under the Municipal Act legislation. They look after parking administration and crossing guard administration as well for the city. So you'll see that as we proceed through the budget layout. Some of the significant challenges over the last few years for the division and for the city have also resulted in some positive outcomes for our department. We've had almost 100% turnover in the finance division, which has caused delays in our financial reporting, but has also led to a strong and cohesive team of new staff who've all jumped in with both feet to learn and to learn everything and to bring innovative solutions forward. So I'm pretty excited about that going into the next year. Our very responsive IT division has assisted us over the last few years in mitigating many challenges created by the pandemic. They were able to pivot their support provision to include more remote options than were previously available, and still seeking creative ways to do business while ensuring our security of our data and our systems. The clerk's division was also able to pivot quickly to ensure continuity in council and committees through remote solutions and having staff be able to adapt to different ways to providing a lot of the things that they do. So moving forward, corporate services looks forward to continuing to providing exceptional customer service to residents and internal departments and helping council meet their strategic objectives. For the 2023 budget, corporate services also oversees many of the general government revenues and expenses, community grants programs, and administers the financial support for agencies such as CEDCO, the BIA, and the Library and Police Services Boards. When council approves financial support to some of our municipal shared services, such as Huron-Perth Public Health, Spruce Lodge, the Stratford Perth Museum, Destination Stratford, ambulance and archive services, regional roads, and all that sort of thing, the Corporate Services Department administers those financial flows and coordinates some of the reporting and consolidation work that goes along with that. So aside from parking, IT hardware and software, and some of our physical space requirements, the Corporate Services Division does not have a lot of capital requirements typically. Overall, the division tends to be a revenue positive division as they are the administrators of the taxation and other reserve funds and other revenue sources for the overall city. So that just kind of gives a bit of the lay of the land of corporate services. So I'll draw your attention in the budget package to page 8 of the capital tab, which starts to talk about the capital asks for the parking areas. So on page 8, that's the 10-year forecast. So you'll notice and I'm just going to walk through the layout of this. The other divisions may not get into this depth, but just to help council navigate the package of information. We've got 10-year capital requirements for parking identified of just over $3 million. Of that, we're looking at almost $2 million in 2023, and that's consisting of several projects, but primarily the biggest one being the improvements to the Erie parking lot. We've also got EV charging stations project in there as well, and some smaller projects as well. So I don't think the intent really would be to go through each specific project, but I would like to sort of highlight some of those, and we'll go through them by division. And if there's any specific questions, at this point, I would open up the floor to councillors if they have any questions about the parking division. Any projects that you'd like more information on, or anything that you'd like to explore further.
Any questions?
These are the easy ones, so we'll get into it a little bit further as we go. But if there's no questions, I'll carry on. So I'll draw your attention to page 13 in the package, where we talk a little bit about the information technology services. So here we have things like replacement of some of our laptops, our computers, our hardware, our sometimes printers or other types of hardware. We've got network equipment as well, where they've got servers and other connectivity types of physical assets. And then we've got video surveillance equipment included in there for 2023. So we've got $445,000 worth of capital projects proposed in 2023 out of about a $3 million 10-year forecast. So of that, all of this and of the parking as well, I should have maybe referenced, but all of these projects are being funded through the reserves and reserve funds, whether it's through existing reserves or current year contributions to those reserves. There's sometimes a mix, but just wanted to highlight that. Just dipping back quickly to the parking projects are funded by parking revenues that have been allocated to our parking reserve. So again, they're not coming from any previous taxation levy impact. They're coming from fees that were raised through parking. So anyways, that was a bit of a jump back. My apologies for that. So I will point out there was a typo or an error in the personal computers line item. We've got $192,000. That is the correct number. But if you do reference back the detailed project form, which is on page 14, you'll notice that it says only 96,000. That number is incorrect. It should be reflecting the 192,000. So it's just a bit of a mistranslation in our supporting documents. So my apologies for that, but doesn't have any impact on the proposed project listing on the summary basis. So any questions on the IT side? Okay, you guys are easy tonight. So as I mentioned earlier, I've asked each of the departments to give a brief overview and then jump into their capital works. So I will maybe turn it over now at this point to the fire chief to talk about the fire division and airport.
Perfect. Thank you, Carmen. And good evening, everyone. It's great to be here this evening. Through the chair, I'm John Parody, and I've been the fire chief of the city just shy of 8 years. My portfolio includes emergency services, the Stratford Municipal Airport, and community emergency management. The Stratford Fire Department is a full-time career department comprised of 52 staff, providing 24/7 coverage for the community. The department provides general fire services for the community, fire prevention, public fire safety education, fire safety standards and enforcement, and fire inspections and investigations. Other key components of the department include community emergency management coordination and fire dispatching operations. So the fire department, if I could draw your attention to page 17, the fire department has no capital request for 2023. And that typically gets people very excited considering the cost of our trucks. The department's past reserve contribution was $200K per year, which was temporarily reduced to $100K to meet the needs of the day some years back. Each year, staff and council have been increasing by $25K to get back up to that $200K to better prepare for future capital forecasts. As of 2023, we will be recommending in the operational budget a $25K increase to bring it up to the $175K point. So if you look at the capital forecast on page 17, our fire hose, 1 utility vehicle replacement, engine 2 replacement, and our self-contained breathing apparatus, all due to be replaced over the next 10 years. It totals $1,730,000. We will have $1,750,000 in our capital reserves in order to fully fund those forecasts. And strategic priorities, this aligns with our strengthening our plans, strategies, and partnerships by communicating clearly with the public around our plans and activities. And I'd be happy to take any questions on the fire department capital forecast. And Carmen.
I don't have a question, but I hope I'm not interrupting any council members that wanted to ask one, but I just wanted to highlight for council, this division and this department's kind of a good example of where we want to see us moving towards for many of the other departments. John referenced his contributions to capital that occur in the operating budget, and they look like, based on what we see today and what we know today, to be sufficient to meet the 10-year need. So that's kind of the place where we're headed for, or where we'd like to go for all of these. So we have obviously some very large divisions, some very large infrastructure departments to address, and we're not going to get there quickly or overnight, but just wanted to bring that in the context of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Any other questions? Councillor Sutherland.
Sorry, thank you. Through the chair, am I correct that that Chief Parody will be going over the airport next, or should I?
Correct.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I will wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now seeing any other questions, I'll now move on to the airport. So the Stratford Municipal Airport is located within the township of Perth East, just 6 kilometers north of the city, occupying 480 acres. There are 2 asphalt runways covering 23 acres. Airport operations are contracted out to Stratford Air Services Limited. So under our capital forecast, if you turn the page over to page 18 that you just had for fire, you'll see the airport. And the only capital request is a carry forward from 2022 for the 400K contribution to the larger corporate initiative of replacing the underground fuel tanks that the corporation owns throughout the city. So it's not specifically our project, it's what we'll be contributing to a larger project in order to get those done. You'll notice, so that 400,000 plus the airfield lighting system upgrade in 2031, that comes to $1 million of forecasting over the next 10 years. We currently put away 100,000 a year in the airport for capital reserves, which when you multiply by 10 is $1 million to be exactly on track to manage all of our forecasted needs for the airport over the next 10 years. I'd be happy to take any questions for that as well. Councillor Henderson was first.
John, is this where we have to replace the underground fuel tanks? Do we put money in the reserve for that? I know we do it for the fire trucks and all that, but do we actually have that? Do we put that in our? I see it's coming out of reserves, but I just wonder if we put so much, a certain percentage. What does it have to be done? Every 30 years or 32 years or something?
Well, we're at the 30-year mark, and I can't say for sure, but I believe the insurers were saying 30 years. Carmen, know the exact number?
Through the chair, this is actually, thanks Councillor Henderson for raising this. This is actually a broader conversation for that encompasses several other divisions. So you'll see underground or fuel tank replacements occurring in a couple of other divisions as we work through this. It was something that arose as part of our 2022 insurance renewal. The insurer identified that many of the underlying or underwriting companies for risk management aren't touching fuel tanks that are older than a certain age. 25 or 30 years is kind of the maximum. So they won't even provide insurance coverage for environmental issues or for liability relating to those tanks. So it was brought to our attention through our broker last year, and he was able to secure last year and this year a continuation from our policy because we do have them inspected. They are in reasonably good condition, even though we haven't seen any leaks, but they still are indicating that coverage is the days are numbered for that kind of coverage. He actually had to outsource it to an alternative coverage provider in 2022. So we're still with that alternative provider. So I'm glad that we did have that coverage extended because it's taken us a couple of years to get ourselves to a point where we can go out and tender this project properly and have the scope properly identified and get contractors and suppliers to bid on it. So I hope that gives some more context.
It does. And then I'm just wondering, like, when we do something like this, it sounds like we have 2 underground fuel tanks. So do we do one at a time so that there's still fuel available, or how does that work?
So the way that project works for the airport is that we will continue using the current tanks while the new ones are put into place. Once the new ones are commissioned for use, then the old ones will be taken offline for continuity of business. For the asset management side of it, once we have the true actual cost after the project is complete, that'll be totaled up over the amount of years and built into our asset management plan and future capital forecasting for replacing them 25, 30 years down the road.
And what happens to these tanks? Are they recyclable for metal, or
The
ones that we're getting rid of?
Because we got a mix of metal and fiberglass tanks. So
Oh,
how that's going to be dealt with by the company, that'll be built into the plan for disposal by the contractor. We won't be disposing of our own tanks.
okay, thank you.
Welcome. Yes, Carmen.
Through the chair, one other comment for Councillor Henderson. It was a great question. Do we currently contribute to the reserves for those particular asset replacements? Historically, we haven't, and that's why we end up with a broader picture of a deficit. But that said, it's been sort of my approach when we're providing council with financial implications through staff reports and through some of these things that, in 2023's budget, for example, or 2024's budget, when we learn or we know that, for example, just using this one example, that fuel tank replacement cost $400,000 and we're going to have to do it again in 20 years, we're going to be then saying that the contributions for the airport reserves should be increasing by $20,000 or whatever that number is every year. So we can kind of capture that and plan for that replacement a little more appropriately than has been done in the past. Okay.
Great, thank you. Councillor Subban.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if you have an idea of the $400,000, how is it the majority of that is to remove the existing tanks?
So the 400,000 is both the removal of the tanks and new tanks and new dispensing hardware. So it's all encompassing for the entire project is what we forecasted that after reaching out to some people in the industry of what they advised we should be setting aside for those for jet fuel and tanks.
Okay, and just another question, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is this something that, is this something that would be possible to partner with like a private business? I'm asking, but I'm also assuming that nobody would come and just remove the tanks for us. And then put in their kind of tanks?
Not in this type of project. This is a part of a larger scope project. When we go out and we get a contractor, they're going to be looking for one contractor to replace all of the underground tanks in all the divisions in the corporation. So we're not looking to piecemeal little bits of the contracts depending on what department or what service is being provided throughout the corporation. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible, just to get back to business as quick as possible.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor McKay.
Just a question regarding why, this is airport services are being used by certain organizations. Why are they in fact not paying for the costs why is that cost not being built in somewhat over that period of time to the fees that we're charging other organizations?
If you could clarify for me, other organizations.
Well, whoever happens to be using the airport for, is it our own use that we're, who, in the sense of a customer going to a station to fill up their car, that Esso station is building in their costs to, if they have to replace tanks over 20 years into the overall thing. That's basically what I'm getting at.
I understand now. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
So the largest revenue generator at any airport is fuel sales. And in order to draw in customers or hangar owners or users of aircraft, we have to be able to supply fuel or basically you build it and they will come. This is kind of the point of having fuel sales or being able to dispense fuel at airports. So essentially we look at the fuel tanks and dispensing of fuel as the cost of doing business, but we can recover that over fuel sales of whether or not we increase fees in the future and capital forecasting. But typically the users of the airport, if we were looking at the hangar owners and the multiple aircraft that are kept there, they already do contribute by the fueling up of the aircraft and paying their land lease for those hangars. So there is some contribution there. Typically, you get into shared services at airports when it comes to taxiways, expansion and future renovations on those taxiways and upkeep. That's where we tend to get shared services agreements in place, but not typically for fuel tanks. I hope that clarifies it, Councilman McCabe, but I can always bring our airport manager, Andy Woodham, to a future meeting, and we can draw upon that question again in more detail.
Well, that's good. Thanks.
Carmen, I think I saw your hand.
No, I'm good. Actually, I just was going to keep things moving along if there's no other questions.
Seeing none. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. So again, in the essence of kind of trying to move through some of these capital programs tonight, I'd like to call on social services next to do their brief overview and then tackle their 10-year forecast as well. Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Through the chair, good evening. I'm going to outline the opportunities and challenges that the Social Services Department has with the 2023 draft budget prior to going into capital. The Social Services Department, the key Ontario Works. Some of the opportunities we looked at with this budget is new case management model, leading us to rethink how services are delivered and how to better utilize the funding that we received. We also looked at an opportunity for shared resources with the 4-county consortium to bolster training and staff supports. The challenges with the Ontario Works budget was provincial budget cuts coupled with increased caseloads will impact the service delivery standards and put added pressure on our staff. In regards to the homelessness prevention department opportunities, we were going to work collaboratively with our partners to enhance services and increase services for vulnerable people using wraparound supports and affordable units. And some of the challenges we're going to see is the access and availability of services specific to the growing population of the homelessness experiencing tri-morbidity, which includes chronic health problems co-occurring with substance use issues and mental health issues. For our Anne Hathaway daycare, the opportunities, we're seeing an increase to special needs resourcing supports and achieving full license capacity and workforce stability post-pandemic in 2023. And one of the challenges we are seeing is the increasing food costs have us reviewing the menu and more creative ways to ensure nutritional meal planning is completed. In housing, some of the opportunities we're seeing for 2023 is the strengthening of collaborations with partners to better serve tenants and the completion of 200 Britannia Street, increasing the affordable housing units within our CMSM. Some of the challenges we're seeing within housing is ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of all tenants and community members while working with a multi-barriered individuals, and the continued maintenance, repair, and revitalization of aging housing stock. Within our Children's Services Department, some of the opportunities for this budget includes we're going to use existing funding to support directly operated licensed home childcare and expand the childcare programs. And we're going to have access to provincial capital for targeted expansion projects supporting additional childcare spaces. Some of the challenges we're seeing within this division is to develop strategies to support recruitment and retention of qualified educators in order to reduce wait lists and support capital expansions, as well as an increased investment is needed to support capital expansion outside of the school board-based projects. The social services operating budget, the overall operating budget is 35.93 million, and it's funded through upper tier government, which is provincial dollars at 60.79%, 21.84 million. Our partnering municipalities is 14.49%, 5.21 million, and the user fees is 10.46%, 3.76 million. Upon the City of Stratford tax levy, we are looking at 10.13%, 3.64 million of the overall cost of 35.93 million. Other funding includes 4.13%, which is 1.48 million, which is other funding that comes in, such as urgent needs and LEAP. So in regards to the capital request for social services, our capital ask is 1,664,500 for housing, which is cost shared amongst this consolidated municipal service manager. The Perth and Stratford Housing Corporation provides rent geared to income housing in Stratford, Mitchell, Listowel, Atwood, Milverton, and St. Mary's. This portfolio includes 663 units that are comprised of single-family dwellings, townhouses, and apartment buildings. These units on average are more than 50 years of age. The costs for capital maintenance of these buildings and the ongoing operation are shared with the town of St. Mary's, Perth County, and the city of Stratford. The city of Stratford is the sole shareholder of the Perth and Stratford Housing Corporation, and we are responsible for the management, maintenance, and operation of the portfolio. In 2023, a number of capital projects are planned to support the health, safety, and well-being of our tenants. The capital projects can be generally grouped into health and safety, such as fire alarm system replacement, video surveillance, and electronic door access, parking lot repairs, accessibility, and electrical upgrades and balcony repairs, as well as life cycle replacements such as windows, kitchens, roof replacements, furnace replacements, and fencing. The supporting documents are on page 114 to 126 of your capital binder. Through the chair, Carmen.
Thanks. Thanks. That was a great overview, Kim. Thank you. Just wanted to point out for all of council's benefit. So the transfers that are planned for reserves that happen in the operating budget are structured to cover these capital plans. But then as the director alluded to or commented on, we do recover some of those costs. So you'll see those cost recoveries from our partners and from our grant funding, and that through the operating budget, which we'll get to at a later date. So I just wanted to provide that extra context, but any questions can go to Kim directly. Thank you.
Councillor Hunter.
Sorry, thank you. I did have a question in respect of the roof tie-offs and access. I just wasn't sure exactly what that was and wondered if you could give some guidance.
Thank you, through the chair. I do have the manager of housing on. This is a relatively new capital requirement, and it comes down to health and safety. So I'm going to ask him to speak to the reasoning behind this.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you, Chair Hunter. The roof access is their ladders bolted to the side of the wall. So this for two-story buildings or higher, or two-story buildings. So this will avoid the need for a ladder being leaned against the building, which could possibly slip. Isn't as stable as something which is attached to the side of the building. The roof, the tie-offs are a system that's someone who is working up on the roof, whether that's on one of our HVAC systems up on the roof or cleaning one of our drainage systems or roof scuppers, is able to clip a cable to. In case there was an incident where someone slipped and fell off a roof, they would be able to attach by a cable. So they're both health and safety that we're working with the Human Resources Department on as well.
Thank you. Sorry, if I can, I'll turn it back to Carmen, our Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, through the chair. My apologies. I dropped the ball on that one. So we're at a point now, I guess, where we can a bit of a crossroads here. We can make a bit of a decision, I think, on the meeting. We've covered off 3 out of our 5 departments. The latter 2 departments, with being infrastructure and development services and community services, are our larger ones. But we're at 8 o'clock at the moment. So I just wanted to turn it back over to the chair and to council to determine whether or not we'd like to proceed and get started on the infrastructure and development services, of which there are several separate divisions. So.
Okay, thank you. We have been at it a while. And with those larger sections coming up, should we consider a motion to adjourn? Pardon me, I'll just double check, make sure we've covered everything. Yeah. And we do have information in about upcoming meetings on February 7th and February 21st, but or would people rather carry on? Councillor Seven.
I would agree. They are big divisions. I would make the motion to adjourn and see if everyone's agreeing with that.
All right, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Mayor Ritzma? All in favor? So that motion carries. So we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience with as I fumbled through my first meeting, and we'll reconvene at our next meeting. Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.